thank you to the Jewish nation. If you want to.
Yeah, it's like really good, no? It's really good.
If I were you, I will frame it.
Okay.
No, that's fine. It's just the saris.
Yeah.
Wow.
You all right? Everything.
Yes, I'm all right.
And what time do you have to go back?
I don't really have
Okay, well
to.
then, like, are we going to get you a taxi so that you can come to the vigil?
No, vigil I want to rest because, you know, I'm not a stander-upper.
Okay.
I want to go to the dinner.
Okay.
So what I have said is...
Well, no.
That
I'll give you the room key. You rest in my room while
No, I'd rather rest in my room because I have to get packed for tomorrow morning and so on.
But dinner coming.
Yes, yes.
Dinner's
So
at 8:30.
I know, so that's fine.
Okay, you
That's
go back
fine.
first to your room and come
Yes. This is Shankar, isn't it? Hey, Shankar.
It's okay.
Again, I saw him from the back.
Tonkin, when she finishes, Tonkin wants to say thank you to everybody for 2 minutes as a Rohingya. Yeah, that's it. Nothing else.
He is going to say.
Yeah. Maybe like a
We can close then after.
after.
Were you? Yes. And you've been sending me all kinds of very good stuff. Which, I mean, today's talk is not much, but
2010 we talked.
yes, I took it to.
Yeah. That time is not time now.
Not very different. Very, very different.
They can sign it.
Because I missed you in Bangladesh. I missed you that time. I know, I too, because I'd only seen you in New York. I don't believe I ever saw you.
Okay, let us start.
Yes, also.
So this has been a fantastic conference. I think it was also a historic conference, and everybody who tried to stop it wasn't able to do that, which is a good thing. And I think we were talking about crimes against humanity. We were talking about atrocities, but we were also talking about hope and solidarity. I think that is a very, very good thing. And we close the conference with a keynote by Gayatri Spivak, who I think is very well known in this space, but still I want to say like 2 sentences about her before giving her the floor. Gayatri Spivak is a literary theorist. She's a university professor at Columbia University and also the founding member of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. In 2012, Spivak was awarded the Kyoto Prize in Arts and Philosophy as a critical theorist and educator. She's always speaking for the humanities and using the humanities against what can be called maybe intellectual colonialism in the face of the globalized world. In 2013, she received the Padma Bhushan, the 3rd highest civilian award given by the Republic of India. She has received 11 honorary doctorates and also the Chevalier of the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres by the government of France. She has published a huge number of articles and books, and she was also in 2018 the recipient of the Lifetime Scholarly Achievement Award from the Modern Language Association of America. But not only is she very well-known and scholar, but also a very prominent activist. Since 1986 already, she is working in subaltern spaces, trying to change the subaltern spaces, trying to undo subalternity. And she is also always a voice, and a very important intellectual voice for all those who have to suffer, for all those who have to, who are victims of genocides or crimes against humanity. We are very happy that you are here with us to close this conference with the title, Let's Focus on the Law, but Think Justice. Thank you, Gayatri.
Well, I'm deeply honored to be here, and I'm sorry that there was some confusion about my having to leave early. I am fortunate enough to have been called today by 2 organizations, as you might have heard, the Romani, and this conference. And I really did think that I should say yes to both. I think it's a real honor to be called by them. And indeed, I'm here because I won't say no if I'm called on to speak for the Rohingyas. This is why I'm here. I do not think I'm the appropriate person to give the keynote here. But, you know, if you think you can hear an old woman blabber on a little for a few minutes, I'm yours. But do understand that this is my feeling. I mean, there were people really involved. I'm not involved in that way, am I? But before I say anything, I should say something about India. I'm a citizen of India. I'm not a US citizen. And I'm deeply, deeply ashamed that that's what my country is doing with the Rohingya crisis. First of all, with the general, it was you who brought it up, didn't you? First of all, the general Islamophobia in the country today, I'm not talking about civil society, is so strong that it has even gone into some of the civil society. And as in the country of my residence, the United States, there is a culture of fear, which is quite amazing. And I will say that the civil society, generally speaking, when called on, will show support, but almost as if they are speaking in private. And it's a very unsettling situation. I myself, of course, speak of the Rohingyas at any point that I speak. In fact, I believe that's one of the reasons why Zarni called on me, because you remember when I was speaking in Oxford, which was the last time I saw Tun Kin, I was suggesting that we should, whenever we spoke of anything that we were involved in politically, we should bring in the Rohingyas and create and try to show that there is, I quite agree, you can't have a general organization globe-wide, but this feeling that we as individuals, we who are more or less activist folks with consciences and so on, that we, whenever we speak of whatever it is that we are working at, we should speak of the Rohingyas, and I've kept that promise. But the thing is, therefore, I do speak of the Rohingyas whenever I speak in India, which is often enough, but the problem is that there is this kind of a situation. But I believe it can be made to change because I saw a pretty long analysis in Frontline and also a pretty long analysis in the Hindu. So it isn't as if, it's as if people are moving, especially since the great discontent against the current government on the part of the farmers, it's coming from below, the possibility of taking a stand. So you and I will both hope that this kind of situation will change. I am very grateful to Bangladesh that I'm allowed, in fact, to speak this way. In 1992, the activists in Bangladesh against the Flood Action Program chose me to speak in the European Parliament against the World Bank, confronting the World Bank. And I began my speech by saying that I was not speaking for my country, but I was speaking for the region. And so I will say the same thing here. I am certainly not speaking for my country of citizenship. I'm speaking for the region. Now, I would also like to start by, I'm sure this has been done, but I think I have to do this too. I'm sure you've heard the narrative. When a short time ago, Zarni asked me if I could find a European place, because I'm a Europeanist, work in the United States, for large-scale conference on behalf of the Rohingyas, I approached my dear friend Maria Domar Castro Varela, and the result of this altogether fantastic, the result is this altogether fantastic gathering. So I want very much to thank Maria Domar. Because in spite of a very heavy academic schedule toward the end of the semester, and some of us academics know what that is like, she really did everything she could, because I knew that I was asking the right person. But to be proved so right is sometimes a great joy. So thank you, Maria Domar. I should also acknowledge that my real entry into activism is with Bangladesh. This was, as I indeed said to Dr. Mufidul Haq, about whom I'll say more, I entered Bangladesh in '73 because my mother had worked for the war-raped women. And so I entered sort of on her coattails. And since then, in the early '80s, when there was this huge problem with, indeed, the flood, etc., I asked my homeboy, Amartya Sen, what should we do? Shouldn't we, as Indian citizens, do something? And he said to me, Gayatri, don't do anything, because the international conference that's not being held, that's Nepal, India, and some other place he mentioned, which I now forget. But he said, you know what they're going to say, India, if we say that we are going to do something? They'll say, look, you live in the United States, we are a poor country, that was long ago, we are a poor country, don't bother with us. That's what they would say. But I could not be satisfied, so I did a little cloak and dagger looking around and found finally Zafrullah Chaudhry. And so that was before the schools that you mentioned. That was where my activism, so-called, it is very so-called, I'm an academic, my activism, so-called, began in Bangladesh. So it is also in Bangladesh that I first encountered the Rohingyas, and therefore, to an extent, again, I'm not really the person who should be keynoting here. I know why Zarni wanted me to say something. First of all, because he liked that thing that I said, that whatever your interest, whatever your particular area, you should mention the Rohingyas, because just having digital information is not enough. There's plenty of information. But given the way in which this kind of, I mean, what is our resistance? Signing petitions, reply all, until someone says, please, don't do reply all the time because I'm getting all of these things. That's resistance today, right? So to an extent, what we have to do is go back to face. So therefore, I said on that occasion that you don't just do this digitally, because people are tired. What you have to do is mention this in such a way that there is, whether you name it anything or not, there is in fact some kind of solidarity. That's, I think, why Zarni drags me out and makes me give these keynotes. And second of all, I also said, and I know that he liked this because he said so to me, that given the fact that I am indeed, one of you said that there should be other disciplines, not just lawyers and so on, I am about as far to the idealistic as can be. I'm a literary critic. What could be less activist than a literary critic? But indeed, what I said there was what we know as humanities teachers, that is to say, the real task is to rearrange desire so that people desire social justice rather than laws are enforced. Laws are, if you enforce the law, someone will find a loophole. Therefore, this whole thing of law and justice, this is something that I did say, that if you are able in a group to turn around one mind in this way, that is to say, wanting social justice rather than just to punish. Justice is not just punishing, which is what we heard the ambassador say. It was all about punishing. That's not, justice is not a verdict. So therefore, the idea of changing a mind in that direction, I had said that if you change one, you change 100. And Zarni told me that he had liked this. And that is indeed our work. That our work is not heavy duty, really pushing for evidence so that there will be, people will say the name genocide applies to this situation. That is unbelievably important, but that is not our work. Our work is what is excluded when you just have a name that defines a situation so that you can go to 6 different kinds of laws, as Ambassador Schaefer told us. And Peru can come in, and because of the Rome, whatever it's called, because of that agreement, they can, but they won't, as he said, but they can actually agitate, etc. This is, excuse me, idle talk as to how many different ways you can persecute and punish, because that is not justice. What we are talking, it is just that there be law, but law is not justice. So that what we think about is the very, very long run, where all the laws are in place. We want the law to be in place. Let's focus on the law. This is an important moment. We want the word genocide. But anybody who has worked as much as I work in South Africa, anybody who has worked as much as I do in sub-Saharan Africa, anybody who's engaged in the humanities side in the Balkans, anybody who is interested in places like India and Nepal, in my own city, I gave a talk saying, freedom after independence, ? That therefore, the passing of the law, and I take here I take my lesson from Frederick Douglass, who said, at the time of emancipation, this is when the problems begin. Once you have put the laws in place, you think all is well. Nobody actually thinks about how to change the minds of folks so that they will want this rather than simply pass the law and then let the old-fashioned mindset prevail. I will say to you, and I don't know what you will say, this is why I don't want to give a very long talk, because I want to hear how you will respond to this kind of impractical stuff. I would like to say to you that most of the people in the world do not belong to the conscience that Zarni spoke about. Believe me, most of the people in the world, apart from us, nicely motivated, progressive bourgeoisie, as Lenin would say, most of the people in the world believe rape culture and bribe culture are normal and are not much moved by large-scale violence, especially if it is put in the place of the logic of war. And so therefore, I think if we really want to make a change, we will have to look elsewhere. And many of you in the 2 or 3 sessions that I heard have said, and I certainly agree with this, that the Rohingya should be involved. But the way in which I would like to suggest that the Rohingya be involved is a little bit different from where you have located the involvement. One of you talked also about victim-based. I want to take that victim-based further. But before I do any of this, I should also say that the Romani have, in fact, drawn up a statement of solidarity with you, and they're collecting signatures, and they will actually pass this on to you as soon as they have a sufficient number of signatures. It's my, yes. It's my obligation to report this to you, and here again, there's a certain kind of connection, because the Romani are a very old open secret who have really suffered with no land of their own. They do not have a state. And the Rohingyas are the most recent and most atrocious kind of loss of land and place really coming into being since, for political reasons, since the 60s. So that old thing and this new thing, if those two can work together, we can also think about other groups that can have the kind of solidarity that many of you have spoken of. I should also say that the Arakan National Rohingya Organization, I have no idea, because I'm not a regular activist within it, whether I should take a positive or a negative view about this organization. You will forgive me. Filed a communication with the ICC in 2015, arguing for the prosecutor to take jurisdiction over the situation in Myanmar, because they felt that there was more than enough evidence of genocide and crimes against humanity. I report because these people have been in touch with me before I met either Tunkin or Zarni, and so I just say what they have been saying to me. Although Myanmar was not a state party, the request was for the ICC to start an investigation because the Rohingya are stateless people as a result of purposeful laws on behalf of the Myanmar government. This was 2015. In August 2017, another communication was resent to the prosecutor, prodding them for an answer to the original petition and also bringing to their attention new situations that were ongoing. This was prior to the peak in violence in August. The prosecutor's office wrote back declining to take jurisdiction because Myanmar didn't sign the Rome Statute. The organization is continuing to work on this issue to find ways to stop impunity of those in Myanmar who are continuing the genocide, which label they openly use, and of course they also say that Russia and China will block this. And I won't go any further, but the Rome Statute, as you know, is the treaty that established the International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute established 4 core international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. It was adopted at a diplomatic conference in Rome on 17 July 1998, and it entered into force on the 1st of July 2002. As of October 2017, 123 states are party to the statute, among them, of course, as we heard, Lima, Peru. Among other things, the statute establishes the court's functions, jurisdiction, and structure. Now, if you take a look at the Rome Statute, as indeed I did, being an academic who does her homework, I didn't bring the whole thing, it's a book, but I brought the table of contents. The table of contents, which is many pages, will prove what I'm talking about. It is wonderful that there should be all kinds of, remember, Ambassador Schaefer even said that conduct in question occurred, is what the Rome Statute declares, and therefore diplomacy can happen around that phrase. conduct in question occurred rather than crime. I would like to ask you, who among the Rohingyas whom we meet in these, and I have met them, in these camps, would understand the distinction? When we are talking about bringing the Rohingyas in, let us remember that in order to understand that these are the ways in which, I quote Ambassador Schaefer, international justice can be found for the Rohingyas. International justice for the Rohingyas. Justice for the Rohingyas is not national courts and the other 6 where you can't really do anything, Sierra Leone, etc., etc. That's not what we are talking about. Justice is something else. And I'm going to talk about it just slightly before I give yourself the opportunity to question me, instruct me, and ask me not to be impractical. I would like to start with a quote from somebody from, I won't name his name. He sent me an email. It was a private email. But it is from, in fact, quite an important Canadian university. And I quote him. "It disturbs me to see the use of scholarly power, their scholarly discourse and status to discredit Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, who gave her life for her people. She worked for her beliefs in freedom for her people, and gave up, who the hell are her people? And gave up many years while we sit in our offices and write about the world we live in. She knows Myanmar, the people, and is walking a fine line to keep the country on a path to democracy and not allow the army to rule the country once again." This is a person at an important university, okay? And he's writing to reprimand me, saying, "I used to like the work you did, now I'm disappointed in you." Okay. "You and others speak about genocide, which has definitions that do not coincide with the lived experiences of the Rohingya. Yes, they are a marginalized group living in Rakhine. They're disliked due to historical occurrences, and they're not wanted in Rakhine. How do we change this attitude so that Bengali Muslims who have rights receive them within Myanmar? Zarni and your comments serve to make sure that the Rakhine will harden their attitudes toward Rohingya, a name that will never be used within the country. This context is a reality of the current situation. I am not an expert," he writes, "but a person who is trying to soften the attitudes that currently exist." Soften the attitudes that currently exist. I wanted to quote him because he is talking the same talk that I was talking a minute ago, that you have to change people's minds, mindsets to want. So this is, the other side knows how to talk nonsense using the same kind of language. It is against such people that we are fighting as we try to establish the overwhelming evidence of genocide. Therefore, I'm not against evidentiality. But on the other hand, this speaking of softening the attitudes that currently exist, it is against the meretriciousness and mendacity of such games that what I'm proposing has to be considered. Long-term changing of mind so that the world's people, the largest sector of the electorate in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, do not, in fact, because of class apartheid in education, do not bring in tyrants at the heads of, because their democracy as body count. They are the ones who are bringing in tyrants for many, many states out of fear, out of not understanding what democratic judgment might be. And in that kind of a situation, we cannot just simply cite ourselves as holding the conscience of humanity. We do not represent humanity. Our small private choir to which we preach is not going to make any change, sustain any change at all. And I would like to say that before I go on any further. Dr. Mofidul Haq, who's sitting here, was kind enough, and who spoke, was kind enough to let me speak to some young lawyers who had gone in precisely to gather evidence. And I would like to use, and he was really good enough to remove himself when I was actually speaking to these people. He showed me his wonderful museum, etc. But then we sat down and he said, "I think I'm just going to go down to the office." That was a tremendous gesture. So we could speak, you know, as people would speak in private. Now these young women, they, as one of the women said, "I'm a lawyer," she said, "and I encounter a lot of rape. But from what I witnessed, I am still so deeply affected that it is hard for me to sleep, to speak, and even to think. Now, this is different from just gathering evidence, okay? Then, the other women spoke in this way. This sentiment was echoed. And I spoke to them very strongly, saying that even as they provide evidence, which is crucial because they're lawyers, and because it is crucial that the law is now changed, it's most important, so that genocide is accepted as a fact. They should, however, guard the sentiments that they are now expressing and feeling so that they can go on to work not only for evidentiality, but when one hopes the law is passed for social justice further, because they had been touched in a way that was different from just their obvious legal expertise. The men, as they spoke of the tremendous atrocities visited upon especially the children, I remember one example of a child and many children, indeed, being shot in the penis, children. The other kinds of atrocities, you know, there is no lack of evidence in this room of how the genocide, but this idea, look who's there on the picture. I'm interested in the education of children because they're the future. And so when this guy talks about, and that's what I've been involved in since 1986. So therefore, when he spoke about male children being shot in the penis, we are talking, of course, about how deeply, and he was too, and they were, how deeply the children are turned against the people who have perpetrated this and crouching in fear. Now, this is not what you do to the minds of children. So when Mark Pierce writes, the overwhelming message from these children is that they are afraid of being taken in the night, afraid of what the future holds, he should know that there is also this feeling of we'll get them when we grow up. He should know that this is also the case. I, at this point, say that saving the children is not just placing them in a protected space. Of course, they must be placed, but also looking forward to the future, where they would be agents of democracy rather than victims of the system that says that this is all in the interest of sustaining democracy in Myanmar. This is where Andreas Schülle's wonderful remark that it should be victims-driven, I take it beyond in this impractical but very practical way, because if you don't do this as you are doing the law stuff, there's no future for the Rohingyas. That's a real future, except top-down protection from us. That's all we hear, top-down work with them. That's not how, in fact, a group is protected. Protection is wonderful, but this top-down, in general cases, philanthropy or top-down protection, as we hear of what can we do, it's always spoken in the interest of forming institutions, forming coalitions. Top-down, we do it. But it is necessary to think of the Rohingyas, for those of us who are impractical, that it is necessary to think of how it is at all possible, under the present circumstances, at the same time, to think about producing the habits and intuitions of democracy in Rohingya children. Believe me, I would be quite ready to give practical advice, 30 years of experience as to how this can be done. I can't teach more than the 5 schools where I teach, hands-on teaching. It's the only way. But I would certainly be very ready to sit down with anyone who would really be interested in all this. Not just literacy, income production, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, opening schools, giving textbooks, even little computers, $45, etc. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a way in which the victims become agents of democracy. In fact, I will tell you, John Weiss has kindly suggested that my emphasis that before we make any long-range plans, we must make the Rohingya themselves part of the planning should be considered. He writes, we must get buy-in from the targeted group right at the start. Save Darfur did not do this. It was a mistake, he writes. We do not want to repeat. We need contacts with Rohingya who can help plan with us. It has been my great good fortune, mine, Gayatri Spivak's, to have been in contact with such activists. In fact, I met Tunkin before I met Zarni, but you must realize that important as it is, and as much as it is a part of present reality, I am also speaking of other kinds of encounters, and however important a situation where the agency is given over to the other. And I'll tell you a story again. You will think, and I've told it, some of you have heard it in Dhaka, where I was quite recently, but I think it bears repeating. And some of you will think it's a stupid story, but I don't think Zarni will, because I think Zarni has had some experience of this in Bangladesh that he shared with me. And also, I think his rage when, only the law is considered as justice would make him come towards me. I was in Karachi, and I was lecturing at Habib University, and as I do, just simply to get a reality check, since I'm always put in the five-star hotels and so on and so forth, I like at least, this is not solidarity tourism, this is really more reality check. I like to be driven through the poorest part of whatever city it is, be it Amman, be it Karachi, be it whatever. So I was taken to an area where, in fact, my host, who's a Karachian, said he had never been. And as I walked through, I don't think I told you this, as I walked through, what do I see sitting in the mud doing some kind of rush thing? Rohingya women. And people are telling me, don't step in the mud, your shoes will be soiled. My God, I mean, think of these people. It's not as bad as the soldiers saying they wouldn't lift a hand, but what kind of statement is this? But at any rate, they could tell. See, it must come from the other side. The response must come from the other side. Because, I'm a British literature person, right? Shakespeare. When in Henry V, the guy who's Glendower, I think, says, I can call the spirits from the vasty deep. And Hotspur says, why? So can I, and so can anyone. But when you do call them, do they answer you? See, it must come from the other side. You can't just go on talking about contacting them. And so they could tell, I knew they could tell, that I thought they were human beings. And they started talking to me. I was saying nothing. They started talking to me. And my experience with the poorest of the poor, the subaltern, if you like, small groups on the fringes of history, that's small social groups, that's Gramsci's definition, small social groups on the fringes of history. My experience is that they are quite often multilingual, because they can speak more or less the language of the ruling class, and they can also speak their own, whereas we are, powerless. So as they started speaking, I started screaming at them. I said, "Bujhte parchi na, khali bangla bolte pari." I can't understand. I can only speak Bengali. That's all I said. And they started speaking in some kind of language, parts of which I could understand. They showed me the swamps where their children were shitting. They showed me all kinds of things that none of the people, my hosts who had taken me there, even knew. This is what I mean by being encountered by the other. This was just a random happening. But when you see the other side thinking that you ought to be able to speak to them, this is very different from top-down protection and top-down kindness. I will tell you another story which doesn't have to do with the Rohingyas, but with Bangladesh. Remember the 1991 cyclone, Ghurnijhor? I was going in a trawler with aid from EU, with a small barefoot teacher and the Majis. And you know how it was, you could smell the corpses and so on and so forth. And the tide was so high that the trawler couldn't dock. Finally, at dawn, it docked. And you know what the mud is there like? It's like ice, prem kada. It won't let you go. In that mud, the women came running because they heard that there were two women who spoke Bengali. And what did they say? They said, "We don't want to live. We would rather die. They're treating us like animals." And about whom were they speaking? Doctors Without Borders, because the ones who were interpreting for them, the lowest stock who can speak a little bit of English, have nothing but contempt for the ones who are absolutely down below. And so therefore, they were saying against the women whatever they wanted to say to Doctors Without Borders. So in this kind of a situation where people come running, because they feel that you can do something, because they recognize that you might help them. This is what I'm talking about, not just top-down. It's hard as hell, but as I say, it's not impossible. It's not impossible, unless we work at this in the very long term, to raise a desire for social justice, not just my rights, my rights, my rights, my rights. No, because democracy is both rights and responsibilities toward others. And they are, one hopes that they will have a place where they can claim the land as their land of citizenship, which means they'll vote. They can claim the land as the land which tells them of this, the history of their changing geography since the 9th century. And in such a situation, they must immediately be able to have the children, the intuitions of democracy. Believe me, it's very hard to find, and I make mistakes all the time, to think of a pedagogy, a philosophy of education where you can teach this, that it's not just my rights, but also others who are completely unlike me. This is the contradiction within democracy, between liberty and equality. And democracy will never work without this, so that you're once again thinking of the victims only as victims, bringing in tyrants, pushed into voting one way or the other. That's not the future of our world. So therefore, if one can do this with people, I'm talking about my own students on the border of Jharkhand, who are so poor that grandfathers take the children out of the schools, and at the age of 3 to 5, they're looking for other people's goats and cows. They're so poor that they play with broken bits of kapra. I don't even know what that's called. Will someone tell me what is kapra in English? But that's what they play with. See, I mean, little rocks and things like this. Many of my students have not seen trains. I'm not talking about being on trains, but seen trains. And I'm not interested in taking them on little trips, top down, to show them trains. So to an extent, when we think about the intuitions of democracy, because they vote in the very poor, because they're the largest number of the electorate, torn and broken by class apartheid in education, we have to think about the Rohingya as well, hoping that there is a future for them, rather than just the passing of a law that will allow, as Schaefer told us, in many different ways, people to be punished, and we will mistake that for justice. Justice is not punishment. That is something else. That's somewhere else. Laws should be in place. That's why we should look at laws. It's crucial now. Now, I want to say one more thing, and then I think I'll just shut up. And that is about sexual violence. The words sexual violence are now being used again and again to describe the situation among the Rohingyas. Some of us would like to bring back the word rape, rather than this nice, clean, neat word, sexual violence. Because if we do, then this would allow us to connect across boundaries indeed. Because, as I said, rape culture and bribe culture are considered normal across the world, even by some who are in our wonderful position. Try being an old lady of color outside in the street when people don't know you're a Columbia professor, and you will know. I'm 76 years old, still walk with my keys in my hand at night, imprisoned, because they don't care how old I am. I'm certainly not a member of the Sexual Enterprise Society, but I am certainly someone who's in a day, they will rape someone 3 months old and 90 years old. So this kind of thing, rape culture and bribe culture, is so broad, sometimes the bribe is understood as a different Bhadraloki word, so that we don't even know that you're accepting the bribe culture as normal, that we don't want to use just the nice word sexual violence. Sexual violence can be desired. It can be desired, and we don't want to pathologize that. But rape is a completely different thing. And it can then make us connect with allow us to connect across boundaries and recognize that this thing at the bottom and at the top will make us connect with the oldest thing in the world, the oldest institute of validation existing in the world before everything else. So I would like to say, we have talked about rape and so on, but I would like to say that when the Human Rights Watch says that the military are using sexual violence as a weapon in the genocide, we should think about it not as sexual violence. It's a very nice, polite term. It's rape. So that's one of the things that I want to say. There are other things on my speech, but I'm tired of my own voice. So I think perhaps I will just simply say one thing which is even wilder than what I've been saying, even less practical than what I've been saying. We've been talking about this so-called democracy. I'm taking a deep breath. I'm really scared to say this. But aren't democracies supposed to be secular? Nobody brings up that word. And so there is this thing, an educated electorate, so that secularism is not the absolutely abstract, laundered Christianity that we, progressive bourgeoisie, constipated secularism, where religion is as private as going to the bathroom. That is not the reality of our countries. But isn't it possible that we can think at some point that even this word will become, not in English, available to the children we are training? I'm much more interested in children's education than anything else. I love adults, but they are already in a society where the situation is unbearable. But children, as you well know, can be trained into violence, into accepting violence, into accepting suicide, into accepting, because they are children. That's why when we hear that they're really, really wanting to take revenge on the people who killed their fathers and shot their penises, we should remember that this must be undone. We can't just see them as victims, but they are agents. And so I would like to say, very hesitantly, that we should be able at least to imagine a future where some of us want to be engaged in the kind of one-on-one and collective teaching, where this is what is being taught, that is to say, in the very young, the habit of the democratic intuition. Not just my rights, the harm done to me, but also others, completely unlike me, who are equal. This is a very hard thing to do. Sometimes saying other people's children works with my very poor clientele, the landless illiterate in West Bengal. But of course, this situation is much worse. I don't know what the answer is, but I want to be able to say it, since I was asked to give a keynote. As a teacher, this is my only experience. That is to say, rearranging desires, getting to know people well enough. You have to absolutely enter their space in order to know the pattern of their desires. You can't just think they want this because you think this will be good for them. No. I say this with conviction. My experience is long here, long and deep. You really have to enter them. And this is why I told you the story of the Rohingya women in Karachi. I'm not going to take any more of your space or time, because I think I have said enough, going completely away from the paper that I had actually written. So, because I listened a little bit to the wonderful interventions. So I will stop now, and I hope that means that you will be able to instruct me, ask me questions, because that will tell me how to protect my point of view next time I'm in the middle of legal style, top-down activists. Thank you.
My name is Sugi. I'm a Ilam Tamil. I just want to ask one question. It's in my mind all the time today. One lady in this hall told me today, what happened in Sri Lanka is not a genocide. It's not identified as a genocide. It's not good enough to identify a genocide. And she said she'd been to Sri Lanka and she saw some camps and things like that. It's not good enough to identify genocide. You have to go some more things to do to identify a genocide. What is your opinion about this?
Shall I take 3 questions? That is a very good question, and I would like to take 2 more. If there are no more questions, then I will answer this one. Okay.
I actually first would like to thank you, and especially for your involvement with the Roma community. And this is something I didn't have a chance today to mention. We live in Europe, and we have such a persecuted community for so long.
So long, you know, so hidden,
centuries, centuries. I come from a persecuted community, but then I see the members of my communities discriminating against the Romas. If you come to my hometown, you see a small shanty place where they don't have a running water, where there is no generational impossibility to transfer a knowledge from father to son, from mother to daughters. It's a generational discrimination. I hope to have a chance to organize and invite you to Bosnia and Sarajevo to give a
where
speech.
I go quite often, as you know.
Well, then it will be a pleasure to have you there as well. And I would just like to thank you and to continue raising that awareness, because it's a humanity project.
You know, I only go to places where I'm called. Yeah. I'm not a person who thinks she's good enough to go help people. And the Balkans called me. My old friend, I was a member of the Praxis International. My old friend was Gajo Petrovic.
Okay.
A very dear friend. He was my only personal guest to the conference, or as we called it, the Marxist picnic, where I gave for the first time Can the Subaltern Speak. Gajo was my only guest. So to an extent, what has happened there, as it has come undone, and the laws have been all followed. For the first time, I saw the horrible invisibility of the Roma in Kosovo. You know, it's
all over.
It's amazing.
It's all over.
But I should go to my friend's question.
Yeah. Okay.
See, first of all, you should say bad enough to be called genocide rather than good enough to be called genocide. That's just a mind change. And you see, what I was trying to say is that it is important that that word be applied to certain situations. But it is a word. The word should be applied to certain situations because of the criminal justice that can be perpetrated upon the offenders. And I'm 100% behind that. But that word is also not always available. Genocide, for example, will be meaningless to many, many people who have been the subject of intense suffering. You see, we ourselves, for example, for hundreds and thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of years, we have denied water in very, very punishingly hot weather to small children who certainly have not survived well enough. But on the other hand, if I used the word genocide for our criminal conduct toward our fellow Indians, supposedly, they would not understand the word. So what I was trying to say is we need those words for top-down so-called justice. And I mean, you know, I've been very involved with the Armenians. So for sure, we need those words. And in this context, we need it. But it is not a competition. It is not a competition, because ultimately it is a word that is used internationally for the perpetration of a certain kind of legal procedure which mistakes itself for justice. So I certainly would be with you if you wanted support for evidence that it is genocide, and I would not agree with the person who said it wasn't good enough to be a genocide. But ultimately, it would be because I believe that people like us of conscience should say so, should move in that direction. But that is not where my energies are focused. My energies are focused in places where the word has no meaning. Okay. So is that it? Okay, very good. Okay.
Sorry, brother. We need to be at the memorial. The 7:30. We need to rush out because of the police permit. And so the way we've organized it, there will be maybe 6 or 7 vans, and some of us, will walk, but it will take about half hour at least. But we need to be there at 7:30. So about 4 or 5 vans will go.
So is Shankar going to take me? Who's going to take me to my hotel? Okay. Thank you very much.